Cybersecurity versus Infra, building resilience. Today, I'm going to take you along in my thought process and exploration into this subject, and also share with you my findings I've gathered when talking to a lot of people in the industry and organizations. So, the agenda for today, we're going to be discussing resilience and what are our goals when we are investing into resilience. Then we will move on to what is the actual cost of downtime and how can we actually calculate it. Next, we look at the imbalance that I have found in the resilience investments. And then we have a holistic overview on how can you solve this, or how can you start to have the correct conversations within your organizations. So, who am I? I've worked in the IT industry for 20 years, but the relevant part is in 2014 I did my first AWS deployment, and I started to manage a cloud estate, and over time my time and effort was more and more put into the security part of managing my estate. And this became, for me, an obsession, like a high-tech puzzle for me to solve to stay ahead of the threat actors. And in 2022, I got the opportunity to join Trend Micro, so I could turn my obsession / new hobby into my career and full-time job. And it has been a really it's been really interesting to look behind the curtains to see how the threat actors are working, and also discover all the cool tools and capabilities that Trend Micro has to offer to solve this high-tech puzzle. So, why do we invest in robust, resilient, and then well-architected infrastructure? IT infrastructure is the core for all our digital services and operations. We want to build infrastructure that our business can reliably run on. We do that through adding redundancy to infrastructure to prevent a single point of failure. We add scalability to our solutions so we can adapt to changing demands. We don't want to lose business due to lack of capacity at a high demand for our product. And when something goes wrong, we want to quickly recover so that we can get our services back online to get the business starting to make money again. This is the core essence why we invest in resilience. So why do we invest in cybersecurity? This is also to ensure reliability. But we achieve this reliability by protecting our cyber assets. This can be anti-malware, firewalls, phishing detection, etc. And when that protection fails, we want to detect, respond, and contain the breaches as fast as possible to get the services back online as well. If we combine these two, what is the outcome of these investments? We ensure service availability, we minimize disruptions to our business, and we support the business in their continuity and resilience work. We always want to align our resilience with the business continuity plan. Can we design and build infrastructure so there will always be online and have 100% uptime? No. Can we add cybersecurity solution and capabilities so we never get hacked? No. So what is the real outcome of these two mitigating investments we make? We lower the risk of downtime. That is the goal we want to achieve through both of these investments. For the business, there is no difference why the service is down. It's 1 or 0, it's on or off. They don't care if it's a power outage or you have been hacked. So, a little bit of context for this session, because we're going to go on a journey through my thought process that I've done over the last couple of years. So we need to set some boundaries, so to say. So downtime for today equals a loss of a service and it's associated with a cost. Breach, when we're talking about breaches today and hacks, we're only calculating on the downtime. I acknowledge that there is some other cost when you're breached. I'm going to touch a bit on that later. The brand loss is higher when you're breached than when you're having operations disruptions. And when I talk about risk today, the only risk, the outcome of that risk is downtime, the service being down. So, what is the problem? I've had meetings with organizations, and I talk to them, and they tell me, well, if my service goes down, it costs me $1 million a day. And I'm like, okay, fine. We do an assessment of their cybersecurity capabilities and estate, and we derive that you would need to invest $1 million per year to have an adequate level of cybersecurity. And they tell me no. Because in my mind, I'm thinking this is a no-brainer investment for this organization. But they decide not to further invest into their cybersecurity. This is not a one-time thing. This is a pattern I've seen across many organizations in all areas. And to me, I asked them, do you have redundancy and resilience in your infrastructure? And the answer is yes. And this became a conundrum to me that I started to contemplate a lot. Why do they invest in infrastructure resilience and not cybersecurity resilience? And how do they calculate when to add the resilience, i.e. the redundancy, into their infrastructure? Because we could apply the same metrics to cybersecurity. And I started to ask organizations this. And the answer I got is, we don't calculate it, we just add. This is the way you build things. You have dual core switches. You have a battery backup for your power, etc. So I wanted to explore the relationship between infrastructure resilience investments and cybersecurity resilience investments, and put the risk perspective on top of that. So, to do this, I wanted to do some calculations. And to do these calculations, I ended up with sort of an equation. So here we have the cost of downtime equation, where the first metric is the revenue lost per hour. It's the average revenue generated per hour when the system is operational. Second metric is time, the duration of the downtime in hours. The third one is the extra effort cost, is the total additional cost incurred to restore service. This can be people working overtime and whatnot. And then we have the brand loss costs. This is the cost that includes long-term impacts on customer trust and reputation. And it equates to COD equals RLH multiplied by time plus ECC plus BLC. It's not, we're going to break it down, so it's not complicated. I mentioned earlier that the cost of breach is higher, and we need a sort of secondary equation for that, because if you get breached, you will have the cost of downtime, but you will also have the cost of being breached. You might have leaked data, you might have fines, ransomware, etc. And the brand loss here when being hacked is higher than compared to being down. But for today's session, we will only be using the previous one, the cost of downtime. But it's, I wanted to bring this to your attentions because we're going to touch a bit on this later. I'm trying to compare apples to apples as much as possible when we move forward here. So, it looks like this, plus CBC at the end. After I created the equation, I needed an example infrastructure with resilience built into it to compare with the cost of the service being down. Here is the infrastructure of Online Services Incorporated. It's a pretty standard design, 2 EC2 instances split across 2 availability zones, and a RDS multi-AC backend. And this is basically how I have deployed all my RDS instances in production. And this is based on an actual production deployment I have made as these calculations and this infrastructure. What if we did something a bit crazy and we removed the standby RDS instance, so we have a single zone RDS deployment? The cost difference here is what we're paying in resilience cost for this infrastructure. So in the first example, we're paying $1,500 a month, roughly, and in the second example, $977. This is an RDS with 8 cores, 16 gigs of RAM for transparency. So here I'm isolating a specific metric in resilience investment, and I'm trying to simplify it so that I can do some actual calculations on this. And this equates to, the clicker doesn't seem to work anymore. Could I get the next slide, please? A resilience cost of $539 a month, $6,400 a year. And I took these numbers and I started to do some calculations. I played around with a few different scenarios I'm going to show. And when I did this, it helps my thought process to put everything in Excel, play around with it, and also do some graphing. So I'm going to share with you how that looked for me. So in this example, Online Services Inc. is making $100,000 revenue per year on this solution. That equates to an average revenue per hour of 11.4. The extra effort cost here is $100. Might be a cloud engineer that needs to work on the solution to get it up and running. This is a conservative cost. And we have a brand loss cost of $100. The downtime duration for this example is 5 hours. That gives us a cost of downtime at about roughly $1,000. So I started to graph this out to get a visual representation. And here we have the same example, but the resilience cost is added as a break-even. So what I extrapolated from this is that there is a break-even when you're doing your resilience investment, a break-even. I use air quotes because there are some intangibles of having the peace of mind that you have already mitigated your risk, i.e. not having to fail over your RDS or spin up a new one. And resilience isn't black and white. It's sort of a grayscale because the break-even, yeah, it's not a hard line. But if we are hardlining this and steel manning it, you should avoid 30 hours of downtime with this resilience investment. Otherwise, it's a bad investment if we're hardlining it. And this gave me some food for thought in my contemplations late at nights. And I have a few other examples. Here we have the same revenue. We have doubled the extra effort cost, and the rest is the same. And then we hit a break-even at 20 hours. I have a third example where I also doubled the brand loss cost to 200, and we get a break-even of 15 hours. And we have a last one where I 10x'd the revenue to 1 million a year. The rest is the same, and then we get a break-even of 12 hours. You see where this is going. So now I know the cost of downtime and the break-even point for our RDS resilience investment. But how big of a risk is it that RDS is actually failing and causing downtime to me? What am I mitigating with my investment into this multi-AC? So I went on to the AWS website, and of course it's hosted in EU North 1, this beautiful Stockholm. And I know historical data isn't always representative of future outcomes, but it gives us a reference, a sense of what is the risk we're actually mitigating. Anybody want to guess? The last 12 months, the RDS service in zone A in Stockholm, downtime? 0. The historical outcome was 0 that we're mitigating with our $6,000 a year. I would argue that the future risk of there being an outage on this service is extremely low. So, I then wanted to compare this because we're talking about cybersecurity and me not understanding why organizations are not taking the investments into it. And this is the one cybersecurity threat that everybody fears, and insurance companies are starting to move away from insuring. Soon they will stop offering ransomware insurance. That's a whole other topic in itself. 66% of organizations were hit by a ransomware attack in 2023. Not all of them were successful, but 66% reported some sort of an attack. This is a big number and gives you an indication of the activity level on this specific threat and what the threat actors are focusing on. And that coupled with the insurance companies moving away from it, I mean, if anybody is good at calculating risk, it's the insurance companies. On average, it took 21 days to recover from a ransomware attack. 21 days on average. When I discuss with organizations, I ask them if they have checked their total throughput of their backup system to be able to restore. Most of them have done 1 or 2 backups concurrently, but almost nobody have done 20 and then calculated that throughput on how long it would take to restore a big chunk of their estate if they were hit with ransomware. I've done this calculation at a previous employer. It was not a fun day delivering that report to my manager, I can tell you. And for me, this put really things into perspective about the actual cost and the outcomes of being hit with the ransomware. 21 days. So I, of course, did a calculation on this. And here the new variable is that the downtime hours I'm using is 500 hours. That's roughly 21 days. And then, of course, the cost is astronomical. Here it equates to $105,000 for the cost of this downtime. And of course, I graphed this out as well because I like graphs. Who doesn't? And I have another example comparing or using the metrics in the last example where at 10x the revenue and we have double the extra effort and brand loss cost. And that equates to $250,000 for this downtime of being hit with ransomware. And when I saw these numbers, I started thinking, how do we compare these two scenarios? And I started to think, what would be the worst case infrastructure-wise with the RDS layer? It would be a really bad day for AWS if the RDS service was down for 10 hours. And this, for me, is the worst case scenario for this infrastructure resilience. And what would be the best case for ransomware? I would say 100 hours recovery time would be the best case. That's roughly 4 days. Then you have a really good capabilities. And also landing on the 10 hours, if you're doing this equation and you're talking about on-premise, I mean, you often have a service level agreement. You will get a new physical part if your physical hardware fails between 4 to 8 hours. So 10 hours is, I would say, really the worst case. And the cost of being down for 10 hours, using the previous example, is $2,000. And the cost of being down 100 hours is $21,000. The resilience cost we're paying to mitigate the cost of 2,000 in the RDS layer is $6,000 a year. And if we take that and divide it with the cost of being down, we get a factor of 3. So we're paying almost 3 times the cost of being down in resilience to mitigating a low-risk event. If we apply the same multiplier to our ransomware best case, you should be paying $63K a year in resilience cost in your cybersecurity. for your cybersecurity for online services Inc. This isn't feasible. The factor 3 is way too high to be paying in cyber resilience. And if we're taking the infra resilience cost, paying a third of your infrastructure cost in resilience is also too high in my opinion. I don't like to use the infrastructure cost as a metric when doing the resilience investment strategies. But I would want to have the cost of downtime metric to set as the metric for what do we have in resilience budget for this solution, for this service. And in this example, I would say that the cost of adding adequate cybersecurity resilience to our solution is less than what we're paying for the infrastructure resilience. I'm not saying, just to be clear here, I'm not saying don't build resilient infrastructure. I'm saying take an informed decision on where to invest your resilient budget so you get the most resilient for the buck. Just a reminder, very low historical risk. So, I then wanted to know, but I know the risk of the RDS service going down, at least the historical outcome of it. What is the actual risk of being successfully ransomwared or hacked? And at Trend Micro, we have something that is called a red team. For you that don't know, a red team is someone you hire to hack your organization. And they employ all the methods and techniques that real hackers use, so it's so realistic as possible. And you as a customer, you place flags in your environments that they need to take, and the most common one is domain admin. So I interviewed the red team and I asked them, how often are you successful in gaining these flags? Anybody want to take a guess? I know I'm in Sweden. Nobody talks. 100%. Not 99.9, 100% success rate. What this means, if that somebody wants to gain access to your organization, they will. We have a proven risk of 100% versus a historical risk of 0. How do you even put that into your risk matrix? How do you start to quantify this? And furthermore, how can you motivate spending more on your infrastructure resilience than on your cybersecurity resilience? That kept me up at night, I can tell you. So I then wanted to validate my findings because this was somewhat of a limited sample pool of data from my own personal experience with working in IT. And I wanted to find a good hack or breach that resulted in an extended downtime. And luckily for us, there is a very known public case. I'm not sure if anybody here remembers 2011, but what happened is in 2011 was that the PlayStation Network service that hosts the online service for the PlayStation users was breached. This resulted in that the service worldwide was down for 23 days. Approximately 77 million accounts were compromised with a lot of data associated with them. Sony have reported in their earnings call that the immediate cost of downtime for this was $170 million. This is just for getting the services back online, getting some vouchers and free games for the users that had a loss of service during these days. And that boils down to $21,000 per hour. And if you remember earlier, I mentioned that the cost of breach is higher than the cost of downtime. It has been reported that this cost of breach in the long term have cost Sony between $1 and $2 billion. This is not an official statement made by Sony, but this is what the industry experts tend to agree on is the number. This has had a ripple effects for many years for Sony down the line. But my point here is, if we only take the 170 million as an example, it shows that downtime is really costly. So, it's official, it's costly. Now, you're all sitting here wondering, how do we solve this? And we are mitigating, in this example, a low-risk infrastructure resilience with a high cost, but not mitigating a high-risk cybersecurity threat with a lower cost. Forget all my other metrics today. The cost of mitigating cybersecurity is lower than mitigating infrastructure in most cases. That is an important thing to take away here. So, today, we actually have two silos. We have infrastructure risk that is owned by the infrastructure team and budgeted by them, where you would employ this resilience in the RDS layer, as in my example. And we have cybersecurity risk that is owned and budgeted by the security team or the CISO. And we need to combine all this together and frame it properly. It's business risk. We need to have these discussions with the business owner. They need to be aware of what the risk is and what the outcome of this risk would be. Business doesn't care why the service isn't available. If we're not, if we're not making money, we are losing money. The risk calculation needs to include the business side, and they need to take the decision, how much should we invest into resilience for this service? And based on where you have the highest risk, you choose to properly allocate these funds to bring you the most mitigation and resilience for the buck. Resilience should be its own cost. And that cost shouldn't be based on the hosting of the application or the infrastructure, but based on the cost of downtime for that specific service. Business is used to working with risk. Any type of insurance policy they might have is a risk mitigating factor. Any products they sell, they make a risk calculation on how many returns they will have for that product, and they put that on top of the end consumer price. And I think you would be surprised the engagement you would get from business when you start to have these conversations with them. So there are some key takeaways from today. So I'm going to try again. How many here knows the cost of downtime for your systems? One? Then I'll just ask you, have you weighed that cost and outcome against the risk of it actually being down? You have. I want to talk to you later. Then you're the unicorn in the room. Because what I would implore you to do is do this calculation, weigh the risk, make a weighted calculation of risk versus resilience versus cost. Just take one system within your organization. Include the business into this. And every time I do this exercise with organizations, I find that the behavior of over-investing in resilience for low-risk infrastructure failure and under-investing in resilience against high-risk cybersecurity threats every time. Every time. I've done this over and over. We come to the same conclusion. The numbers might not look exactly as they did in my example, but the trend and the outcome is the same. And nobody takes a informed decision on where to place these resilience investments. Address the imbalance in these investments after you've done the calculations. Bring it up to the business owners. they need to be aware of this. They need to be in the room. You need to be in the room discussing this with them. And you would be surprised the attention you get when you frame this as a business risk instead of something IT related that they don't care about. Prioritize. High risk, high cost areas. Where are we most vulnerable in terms of revenue, i.e. which system have the highest cost of downtime? And where are you most vulnerable when it comes to both infrastructure but cybersecurity? Where are the low-hanging fruits? Address them first. And there is a real business case to be made when in mitigating risk, when the right people are involved and the right people are in the room taking these decisions. So I ran a bit fast, and that was the last part of me. So I would love to have this discussion and share my experience with you guys and have a debate and be challenged on my findings that people tend, or organizations tend, to underinvest in cybersecurity resilience. You will find me at the Trend Micro booth at the show floor, and we have the best coffee at the whole summit. That's why I have this fancy AI picture with coffee. I see there's a lot of competition for that this year. And yeah, feel free to connect with me also on LinkedIn, and let's have a discussion about it. Thank you.